So many familiar faces here in the audience. Thank you, Adam and Greg, for that warm introduction and for being here tonight and for all your support along the way. I too would like to acknowledge that we're meeting here on the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, who are the traditional owners of this land. I thank them for caring for this country for over 40,000 years and acknowledge the struggle that they have had to endure for recognition and justice. I'm so humbled and grateful for all of your support. I really wouldn't have imagined that this was possible. My beautiful mum and dad are here with us in the audience tonight. And I'm sure that when we arrived in Australia all those years ago, they wouldn't have imagined that this was possible either. We came to Australia hoping for a peaceful life. I remember having a pretty wonderful childhood actually in Sri Lanka, full of uncles and aunties dropping by, birthday parties of cousins and friends, and of course long afternoons at the beach. But things changed a lot for us when the war started with the riots of 1983. I was 6 at the time, but I remember it very well. It was a usual weekday morning, and our family was going in lots of separate directions, as all families do, to school and work. My sister and I were staying with our auntie on that day, when the phone calls started to arrive not long after we got there. The phone calls were telling my aunt that the neighbourhood was on fire and that we needed to leave. I remember driving with my aunt to safety, and all we could see on each side of the road was fire. Everybody in the car was crying. I think it was the first time that I'd seen adults crying, and as a child, when you see adults crying, you know something is very, very wrong. But thanks to very good family friends that we had and neighbours, we were harboured for weeks from the mob violence. And like many Tamils from Sri Lanka, we eventually left the country in search of a peaceful home. Settling into a new country is both a wonderful and challenging time. As a kid, all we wanted to do was explore and make friends. But I do remember that when we arrived here, and every time we turned on the news, and I'm pretty sure Dad made us watch SBS News every night, the politicians seemed to be talking about multiculturalism. And I remember that made me feel really, really welcome. The richness of all that Australia has to offer and the great services in our neighbourhood made it much easier to settle. Having access to good quality public education meant that we had opportunity, and it was opportunity, like all migrant children, we wanted to take full advantage of. My parents knew what staying in Sri Lanka would mean for us children. The country had come to a standstill, as it was now mired by war. We came to this country with 5 suitcases and nothing much more, and my parents had to start from scratch. But we are a product of the level playing field we found when we got here. Today, my sister, who might have just arrived, and my sister is an accomplished lawyer. My brother, who's here with us tonight, is a brilliant doctor. And here I am running for federal parliament. That is what this country is capable of allowing people to prosper no matter who you are. This is why I care so much about ensuring that our education system is kept public, that anyone, no matter who you are, can have access to good quality schools. It's why I care that people can go to university if they want to, without having to consider having tens of thousands of dollars of debt hanging around them for years to come. It's why I care about universal health care, because when my mum got sick a few years after we arrived in Australia, we didn't have to worry about anything because the system took care of her. I think all these experiences made me care very deeply about the place I lived in, and it made me want to give back. I soon began to volunteer and realised that I wanted to become a social worker. I spent five years weekly on a soup van in Collingwood, and some of my soup van buddies are here tonight. I'm very happy to see them. And through that experience, I started to see the other side of this country. We got to know the people who slept on the streets in Collingwood, those in rooming houses in the inner city, and the communities of the public housing towers. We heard stories of isolation, poverty and struggle. I remember one of my favourite stops in the Superman run was the Smith Street stop, which was a general open stop and anyone could drop in. You never knew what kind of conversation you were going to have that night. There were the regulars who you saw every week who came for a cup of soup and a chat and some sandwiches. And there were the ones who you'd see only once, but always wonder how they were for years after. I started through hearing all these stories about how people fall through the gaps. And I also started to realise that these gaps were getting bigger. Over the last few years, I've been dedicated to working with people seeking asylum and refuge in Australia. Sadly, they face a much harder time than when we did when we arrived here. As a social worker, you get to witness what bad policy does to people's lives. Working at a migrant resource centre and then the asylum seeker resource centre, I saw so many people come to breaking point. These were some of the strongest and most resilient people I've ever met, who'd made long and perilous journeys to flee from war, only to arrive in Australia to be told that their story wasn't believed, that they couldn't have access to healthcare, housing or education. We were told that we could only refer to people as illegal maritime arrivals rather than people in the emails that we sent our colleagues. This policy regime seemed designed to break people and take their hope away. And we've seen this harshness in lots of other areas too. The government are trying to cut back the healthcare system to make it more expensive to see a doctor. They're starving public schools and making universities more expensive for students. They're even cutting back funding for local government, which means vital things that made all the difference, for example, to my childhood, that make up a neighbourhood, are now under threat. But the Greens are saying we can't do this to people. They're saying that no matter what postcode you're born into or you live in, you should have access to good quality education. They're saying that everyone should be able to afford to see a doctor. They're saying that everyone should have access to affordable housing. And they're saying that people who arrive here in Australia, no matter how you got here, are welcome. I joined the Greens when Kevin Rudd shelved any future plans to take action on climate change, and I just couldn't stand by watching that happen. To see a government not take action on the most alarming threat that we face as a world was just intolerable to me. And through the Greens, they've given me the opportunity to get involved in local government, and I was elected to become the Mayor of Moreland City Council in 2015. Thomson and I have been 2 out of 11 councillors, and I acknowledge my fellow councillor, Councillor Helen Davidson, here as well with us tonight. But I'm so proud of what we've been able to achieve together, and it's given me hope that you don't have to be in the majority to have an impact, to have a say. We've seen what Adam's achieved, being the sole Green in the lower house of Parliament. Imagine what we could do with 2, 3, 4, 10 more. And I hope that we see Jason Ball, Olivia Ball, Alex Vitale in that lower house of Parliament when the election comes round. And you know what? With your help, we can do it. It's time to turn wheels green. Let's help make this country more compassionate and more welcoming. Let's protect our beautiful environments from global warming. Let's transform our economy to one that's built on innovation and sustainability. The Greens have the courage and the vision to make this happen. So let's go out there and let's win wheels.